Hi everybody, Nate from Richard's Guitar Studio, and today we're going to talk about what makes a song in a mode. And this guy Gary and I were doing a back and forth kind of conversation on Rob Chapman's video on how to apply the modes, which is a really good video. I'll link it, check it out. And I thought I would kind of like take a step back and look at the modes from a different viewpoint. I think what happens is a lot of times people learn the modes as scales. And so they'll learn the scales and then not know how to then, figure out, well, when do I use the Mixolydian as opposed to the Lydian or whatever. So not sure how to actually use them in a real life playing situation to create music. I think another mistake that sometimes people make is trying to tackle the modes before they've learned, especially key signatures and triads, those two things. And I have a linked video on how to learn music theory, what to learn first, in the description as well. So if you're not up on your key signatures and the chords that go with major and minor keys, I would really try to do that. Try to look that up, master it a little bit, and then come back to this video. I'm still going to make it, try to have everybody follow this, but that would just be a good idea for you to do that to make it easier for you to learn. So, like I said, a lot of times people look at the modes like scales, and yeah, they are scales, but really what makes a song in a mode, like how do I know a song's in A Dorian? It's the chord progression, not just the scale. There are some songs that have like a riff using, let's say, a Dorian scale. A great example would be Round and Round by Rat. The verse riff, it has an E Dorian scale. But I'm going to say most of the time, 75% of the time, I don't know, what makes a song in a mode is the actual chord progression. And then after that, then you would figure out how to play the scales on top of the chords. So if you're just focusing on modes as just scales, it's not really going to get you that far, because you'll know all these scale things like, oh, the Lydian has a sharp 4, or you could also think of it, the Lydian is the subdominant of a major key or whatever. I mean, you could think of it that way, but it's not really going to give you that insight onto how do I figure out if a song is in a mode or not. So I'm just going to use the key of G major for an example today. And so what we have here is there are whole steps and half steps that make up a major key. The half steps are between 3 and 4 and 7 in the octave. All the other intervals are whole steps. So from G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, B to C is a half step, and so on. Each note in the scale gets its own chord, and there are different kinds of chords in a major key. The 1, the 4, and the 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and the 7 is diminished. That lowercase Roman numeral with the circle next to it, that's a diminished chord. It's a little more rare, that one, in like rock and pop music, so you'll see that much less than the major and minor chords. So you figure, well, I'm in a major key. Why are there different kinds of chords in the major key? Why aren't they just all major? And the reason is that when you make a chord, you're doing a skip in the scale. So the G chord here is G, B, and D. So when I go from G to B to D, you can see that these are 2 whole steps. And when I go from B to D, I have a half step and then a whole step. So that's sort of a unique makeup. If I look at, let's say, the 3 chord, which is B, D, F sharp, B, D, F sharp. Now the distances are different. I have a half and a whole, and then 2 wholes. So just the fact that, like, when I'm doing these skips, because the scale is uneven, it has an uneven amount of whole steps and half steps. When you start skipping in the alphabet, let's say C, E, G, or A, C, E. When I'm doing these skips in the alphabet, you're coming up with different measurements between the notes. So when you have different measurements between the different notes, you're going to end up with different scales. So my B, D, F sharp starts off with a half and then a whole, and then 2 whole steps. Whereas my G chord started off with 2 whole steps, and then a half and a whole. And because of that, the chords are going to sound different, and they're going to be major or minor or diminished. So that's just a general, you don't have to understand this to a specific level, just the overall concept that because we have different whole steps and half steps, we're going to end up with different kinds of chords when we start stacking the notes up to make chords. All right. So that's the first concept. You should know that the 1, the 4, and the 5 are major. 2, 3, and 6 are minor. 7 is diminished. It's going to be like this for every major key. And the difference between the major keys is some might have sharps, some might have flats. But the point is once you have a major scale laid out in front of you, it's always going to be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and major. Right? It's always going to have that set up. Now, so this is G major. Another name for major for the modes is Ionian. So you could say that the G major scale and the G Ionian scale, they're the same. It's the same thing. This is just sort of like the classical name for it, and this is the Greek modal term for it. That's all it is. It has a different name. Now, this one I have circled because this is called the relative minor. So this is an E, the key of E minor. Oops. E minor. So major and minor keys are literally the same thing, except for the note that you start on. So in E minor, I'm going to start on E and then go through the scale. E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E, right? Real fast. If I'm going to write a song in G major, all I do now is I have all these chords set up. I start on G as my 1 chord and as my home bass chord, and then I kind of like go through and creatively select different ones. Maybe I like how it goes from G to E minor to C to D, or I like how it goes from G to A minor to C to D or something. I don't know, like whatever it is creatively that you like combinations of these chords, then that makes your song in the key of G. But if your home bass starting and finishing chord should be a G, and that's going to make it sound like the key of G. Now when I go to E minor, by the way, it's also the Aeolian mode. Aeolian, same thing as natural minor or E minor. When I go to this key, they're literally the same notes. So the E is a minor chord. So here I have it in the first position. So I'm going to just write a 1, a minor 1. F sharp is a diminished chord, so I'm going to write that as my 2 chord, but it's diminished. G is my next one. In this case, it's in the 3rd position, but it's still major. A is minor. B is minor. C is major. And D is major. And then back to E minor. So my Roman numerals look different because they're all in different positions, but if you look at it, all the chords are exactly the same. So in the key of G and in the key of E minor, there's always going to be an F sharp diminished chord. There's always going to be a D major chord. There's always going to be an A minor chord. It just depends on where it is in the scale. All right, so if I'm going to write a song in the key of E minor, I'm literally doing the same chords in the key of G, but I'm starting on an E minor chord. So I'll strum E minor first, and then I'll choose from the other ones and try to make a creative chord progression, and E minor is my home bass starting finishing note or chord, and that makes my song in E minor. So the benefit of knowing this for positioning your scales is if you know a G major scale, you can play a G major scale over both of these keys. If you know a song's in the key of E minor, it belongs to the G major family because I just kind of made the key of E minor out of the key of G. So if you know that G major scale and you know you're playing a song in E minor, then there you go. You can play the same scale over both of these. They share all the same notes. They share all the same chords. It's basically the same thing. The only difference is that the songwriter chose to start on an E minor, which is more of a sad or dark sound, because they didn't want a happier, brighter, major sound. So they just chose to start on E minor, and that makes it have a darker sound because your home bass is that really dark E minor chord. And that's really all the difference. There isn't any actually mathematical difference or note difference between these two. It's simply an artistic difference that the person started on E minor. So that's how the relative keys work. So the next thing is let's look at, so these are major and minor, sort of classic keys. Let's just look at a modal version of this, and I'll do the Dorian mode, which is the second mode. So all I'm going to do now is the same concept of what I just did with major and minor, but this time I'm going to start on A. So I'll go A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A. And then I'm going to renumber these. So A was a minor chord, B was a minor chord, C was a major chord, D was a major chord, E was a minor, F sharp was a diminished, and G was major, and then I'm back to A minor. And I still have my half step from B to C and F sharp to G. Alright? So again, I'm doing the same chords as the key of G, but I'm just starting on my A minor chord now. So let's say I want to have a darker sound than G major, and I don't want to start my song on a G major chord, I want to start on a minor chord. Well, this is just a different flavor of minor that you can get out of the G major scale. So the A Dorian scale, or the A Dorian mode, has its own setup of Roman numerals. And when you write a song in A Dorian, you're simply using the key of G, but starting on the 2 chord, A minor, and sort of renumbering. So again, we still have the F sharp diminished, we still have A minor, C major, whatever. They're all the same chords, they're all the same notes. So now, if you know your G major scale, and you know that the song is in A Dorian, then again, it's part of the same family. All of these things that we were just talking about are still in the G major family, so your G major scale is going to work. So, okay, so what makes a song in A Dorian is that we start on the A minor, and we use all the chords from the key of G and try to figure out a creative chord progression that we like. I like how it goes from A minor to C to D, or sometimes I like going A minor to G to D, or whatever, but you can kind of come up with your own progression as long as you're starting and finishing on the A minor chord, making that A minor chord your home base, and then using all the chords from the key of G.